You've been lying awake running the same thought on a loop for 40 minutes. Not a new thought. The same one, maybe the fourth time tonight, with slightly different wording. Your brain keeps returning to it like a tongue to a sore tooth. You know you should stop. It's not helping. And yet, this is not a modern invention. This is not something smartphones created, or social media, or the 24-hour news cycle. This exact experience, the mind returning, unbidden, to a threat that isn't physically present, has been running in human brains since before Homo sapiens existed. Your ancient ancestor lying in a dark cave in the Pleistocene had a version of this same loop. The specific content was different. The mechanism was identical. Here's what your ancient ancestor didn't have: a word for it, a diagnosis for it, or a system for managing it. Here's what they did have: a brain that was doing something useful, even when it felt like torture. An ancient hunter-gatherer worrying about tomorrow's hunt is not anxious. An ancient hunter-gatherer worrying about whether the neighboring group has been seen near the water source is not neurotic. An ancient hunter-gatherer who wakes up in the night running through scenarios about a conflict that happened yesterday and might happen again is not disordered. They are doing something their brain was built to do: run simulations of the future, identify potential threats before they materialize, and generate the behavioral preparation that might make a difference. The problem is that this system, which worked reasonably well in a world where most threats were physical, time-limited, and resolvable through action, is now running in a world where many threats are social, abstract, chronic, and not resolvable through any immediate action you could take at midnight. The smoke detector is going off. There is no fire. So what did ancient humans actually do when their threat simulation system went into overdrive? Here's the detail that makes this more than an abstract comparison. Joseph LeDoux, one of the leading neuroscientists studying fear and threat response, makes a critical distinction. Fear, he argues, is a conscious cognitive experience, a product of cortical processing. The threat detection and defensive survival circuits underneath it are something else entirely. They are ancient, subcortical, fast, and they predate not just Homo sapiens, but mammals. They may predate the nervous system itself. What this means is, the part of you that scans for threats, detects ambiguity as danger, and returns again and again to an unresolved potential problem is not the anxious part of you in a clinical sense. It is the most ancient part of you, a survival circuit that was running in your ancestors' nervous systems tens of millions of years before anyone could have a conscious thought about it. Anxiety, in the modern diagnostic sense, is what happens when that ancient circuit gets stuck in a specific social and cognitive environment. So why did it get stuck? And what did ancient humans do about it? If your threat detection system brought you here and won't let you leave, that's it doing its job. Subscribe. Ugg worries constantly, and he finds it helps to have company. Ancient humans didn't have anxiety disorders, at least not in the prevalence we see today. That's not a romantic idealization. It's a functional consequence of the mismatch between the threat detection system and the environment it's running in. The evolutionary mismatch hypothesis proposes that anxiety disorders arise, in large part, because ancient survival circuitry is running inputs it wasn't built to process. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection hub, does not reliably distinguish between a predator in the bush and a looming work deadline, between social exclusion by the outgroup and a mildly awkward email exchange. It responds to perceived threat, and perceived is doing a lot of work in a world where your inbox is full and your social media feed is delivering a constant stream of conflict, competition, and potential rejection. Hunter-gatherers faced genuine, acute physical threats: predators, starvation, injury, cold, exposure. These threats were real, immediate, and, critically, resolvable through action. The stress response that mobilized energy, focused attention, and drove behavior was appropriate. And when the threat resolved, when the predator left, when the meal was found, when the injury was survived, the stress response could downregulate. The nervous system returned to baseline. Chronic anxiety, the persistent activation of the stress response in the absence of a resolvable physical threat, is a mismatch problem. The system is triggering correctly on ambiguous social and environmental signals. It's just that those signals, in the modern world, never fully resolve, which means the system never gets the downregulation cue that tells it the threat has passed. What ancient humans did about their equivalent experiences, the night fears, the social worries, the anticipatory dread about tomorrow's challenges, was not pharmacological. It was structural. And the structure was built into how they lived. The ancient solution to an overactive threat detection system was, in large part, to never be alone with it. The same cannot be said for midnight doom scrolling. Physical movement first. Hunter-gatherers moved continuously, walking 8 to 12 miles daily as part of foraging. Physical movement is one of the most robustly documented interventions for anxiety and rumination. It activates the same physiological systems the stress response is trying to mobilize, depletes stress hormones through actual physical work, and forces the nervous system through the activation and recovery cycle that chronic sedentary anxiety never completes. The body prepares for action. Movement is the action. The system downregulates. Social proximity second. Hunter-gatherers were essentially never alone. A person experiencing high anxiety in a small group is surrounded by regulating influences, the breathing patterns of others, the facial expressions of calm individuals, the physical proximity that the social nervous system reads as safe enough to relax. Social isolation is one of the strongest predictors of anxiety escalation in modern populations. Social density was the default condition of human prehistory. Structured uncertainty management. Third, the group collectively processed threats. Around the fire, the specific worry, the neighboring group, the drought, the injured hunter, became a shared problem with distributed thinking applied to it. This is not just emotional support, it's cognitive load distribution. The threat that feels overwhelming to one mind becomes a tractable problem for a group. And the ritualization of these discussions, the stories, the shared frameworks for understanding what had happened and what it meant, provided what researchers now call narrative processing. The conversion of a chaotic, threatening experience into a structured, comprehensible story with a place in the group's ongoing understanding of the world. Here's the research finding that makes the ancient solution legible in modern terms. Psychologist Susan Nolan Huxema, who spent decades studying rumination, the repetitive, passive focus on distressing thoughts that characterizes the anxious loop you feel at midnight, found that the single most effective behavioral intervention for breaking a rumination cycle is distraction through engagement with another task or social activity, not suppression, not positive thinking, not analyzing the thought more carefully. Engagement, something that occupies the cognitive resources the rumination is using. Ancient humans were structurally prevented from isolated rumination. Their living conditions required continuous engagement with tasks, with terrain, with other people. The mind that would have gone into a rumination spiral at midnight was occupied by something real. The treatment for the ancient problem wasn't designed. It was built into every waking hour of the day. There's a deeper layer to this that goes beyond behavioral intervention, and it sits in the specific content of what ancient humans were afraid of. Evolutionary psychologists distinguish between ancestral threats, the categories of threat that were relevant in the Pleistocene, and modern threats. Ancestral threats included predators, physical injury, social rejection, status loss, resource scarcity, and interpersonal conflict. The human threat detection system is finely calibrated to these categories. It responds to them fast, strongly, and with difficulty downregulating. Modern threats include abstract financial risk, uncertain social media dynamics, professional performance evaluation, global political instability, environmental catastrophe, health statistics. These are real and significant, but they are not the threats the amygdala was tuned for. They don't have the time-limited, spatially bounded, action-resolvable quality of ancestral threats. Here's what happens. The ancient threat detection system encounters a modern threat and correctly identifies it as ambiguous and potentially significant. It activates. It begins scanning for more information. The information it finds is more ambiguous modern threat content. It scans more. There is no physical action that resolves it. There is no predator that leaves. There is no moment of safety where the cortisol can drop and the system can reset. The loop runs because the ancient system is looking for a resolution cue that the modern environment cannot provide. What ancient humans had, and what most modern interventions for anxiety are trying to reconstruct, was a rhythm of activation and resolution. Threats appeared. The group mobilized. Action was taken, or at minimum, the threat was processed collectively in a way that produced some sense of resolution, even if the threat hadn't fully gone away. The nervous system got the signal it needed to downregulate temporarily, even in an uncertain world. The research on anxiety treatment points toward the same conclusion from a different direction. The interventions that work best for chronic anxiety are physical exercise, completes the stress response cycle, social support and disclosure, distributes cognitive load, activates the social safety signal, structured narrative processing of the worry, converting the chaotic experience into a coherent story, and acceptance-based approaches that reduce the secondary anxiety about being anxious. Every one of these is a modern reconstruction of something ancient humans had by default. Movement was the day. Social support was the constant. Narrative processing was the campfire. Acceptance was the baseline, not because ancient humans had better emotional regulation skills, but because the expectation that worry should be absent or controlled was itself absent. Ancient humans didn't manage anxiety. They managed their environment in a way that prevented the worst chronic forms of it from developing, and when it appeared anyway, they processed it collectively rather than privately. Step back, and anxiety looks less like a malfunction and more like what it is: an ancient, well-designed threat detection system running in an environment that produces inputs it was never calibrated for, without the structural conditions, movement, proximity, collective processing, that allowed it to regularly resolve. You are not broken. You have a system that was extraordinarily useful for 300,000 years, encountering a set of conditions it wasn't built to handle, without the daily routine that served as its natural reset. The midnight worry loop is not evidence of weakness. It is the same system that kept your ancestors alive in the dark, scanning for threats that were real and physical, now running on threats that are abstract and unresolvable. The system is working. The environment is the problem. That doesn't make the feeling less real. It doesn't make the midnight loop less exhausting. But it changes the question from, what is wrong with me, to what am I missing that the ancient environment provided as a default? The answer is not complicated. It's just hard to get. Here's the one thing. When the loop starts, when the same thought has come around for the third time and you know adding another hour won't improve it, give the worry a job. Write it down. One sentence. What is the actual thing I'm afraid of? Not a paragraph, not an analysis. One sentence that captures the threat. Then write one sentence. Is there an action I can take within the next 24 hours that would move this, even slightly, toward resolution? If yes, commit to it and let the worry know it has a task assigned. The ancient threat detection system is looking for a signal that action is being taken. Give it one. If no, write that down too. There is no action available right now. The system is not looking for a solution. It's looking for acknowledgement. Sometimes naming the helplessness is enough to let the activation drop slightly, not because the worry is resolved, but because it's been heard. You can't turn the system off, but you can give it something to do. And if the idea that your midnight worry loop is a system looking for something to do, rather than a sign that something is wrong with you, lands differently than you expected, that's the reframe. The same ancient brain that worries also had a very specific response when the worry was about another person's behavior. What ancient humans did when they couldn't trust someone in the group, and the enforcement system they built that your brain still runs, that one's already up.